and welcome. This is Sherry Bevan, and this is the Confident Mother. This is a series of conversations in my Career Conversations group on Facebook. And today I'm talking to the very lovely Sue Revell about redundancy. And this is what all of the conversations in July have focused on: redundancy. So Sue, a very warm welcome to you this afternoon. Thank you so much for
Sherry.
giving up your time, because I know you're super busy at the moment.
And unusually compared to lots of people I know, but yeah, it has been a super busy 3 months, I
It
must
has
admit.
indeed, yes.
Yeah.
So perhaps if you could just start by telling, to kind of set the context, just to give us a bit of background about your career and, like, you know, what were you doing before you got made redundant, type of thing, just so that we've got the context.
Sure. So my background is in public sector, and I'd worked in health for 29 years. We might come back to that number.
Wow.
We may come back to that number in our conversation. So originally as a nurse, and then gradually I moved into different clinical leadership roles, and then into senior management roles. So worked both as an operational and a general manager, managing staff and teams and services, and also then led some pretty hefty projects. Part of a really nice part of my legacy was that I was the commissioning manager for the Children's Hospital in Bristol, and then also led the opening of the first phase of the Children's Hospital here in Wales. So I know there aren't too many people who've opened 2 children's hospitals in their career. So that's been part of my leadership role, project management, and then also kind of general strategic development posts. I've worked in public health. Kind of done a real array of roles really in different leadership positions within healthcare. I'd also been a non-executive director, so seen life from the other side of the board as well, both for in the housing and registered social landlord area, and also I was on the board of the Chartered Management Institute in Wales for a couple of years and recently left that role as well.
Wow, such rich depth of experience. So, so these conversations are all about redundancy. So tell us about your, you know, how did it happen to you, and what was that experience like for you when you got made redundant? Which I guess is a few years ago.
It is. So it's 2014, and it's interesting thinking in the moments leading up to this. It's the first time I've talked about it.
Oh, really?
I've written about it because I was asked to contribute to a book about threshold experiences. So I took that opportunity as my chance to reflect on what I'd created through the redundancy experience. And to some level, not that I wish to let anybody off the hook in terms of how things unfolded career-wise, to some extent I'd known it was time for a change for some time. I reached 40 and was beginning to have those conversations with myself about, is this what you want to do for the other half of your career? Not dreaming that actually it will probably be longer than half, given how things have unfolded politically since. So I did know that there was something else that I needed to do, but I went through a period really of not knowing what that was. And then it was clear that the role I was in was being made redundant, and quite unusually, I think, and I appreciate that for anybody who might be listening and feel that, you know, that the experience will be very different to theirs. Quite unusually, it then took 2 years before I was actually made redundant.
Wow.
It was a very unusual position to be in, and but partly because I was asked to undertake quite a very big project on the same day by one part of the organisation, on the same day as somebody else told me I was being made redundant.
Left and right hand not talking to each other kind of comes to mind.
And whoever was in the left hand or right hand, depending on which way you look at it, clearly had no idea that this project would take the length of time that it did. So if I remember correctly, during that 2 years, I actually held 4 different roles, which is really interesting in terms of definitions of redundancy. But what that obviously did, and I know this was a wonderful luxury to have, it gave me a long time to prepare, to think, to train, to get ready, to work out what that something different was, and what that might look like for me. So it was a very difficult time, and called on a lot of skill and experience and behaviour change, I think, to manage that length of departure. There were actually some obvious benefits to having that time to prepare, and to prepare well.
Yeah, and I guess for you, presumably when you were first told that you were going to be made redundant, and then the other side of the organisation saying, "Hey, we need you
We
to
need
do
you
this
over
piece of
here.
work," I suppose when they said that, you didn't know how long that piece of work. I mean,
No,
did you know it was going to be a substantial piece, that it was going to be months rather than days
it was
type
definitely
thing?
going to, it was definitely going to be weeks to months. I
Right,
don't think people really thought it would take months into years. It was a very big investigation that I was asked to lead,
right.
and therefore took on a life of its own really for some time. So hence I was able to do other things around, around it, that people were able to take advantage of my skills. So and that's a really interesting one to manage mentally, because you're aware that
Mm, mm.
you are being used in that way. And it was very important to me to keep at the forefront of my mind that every month was another month where I was able to negotiate my departure in a way that I would choose to lead. And that was
I
actually increasingly important to me the longer it went on.
Yeah, and I guess in some ways that might be similar to how people who perhaps were put on furlough maybe back in May or
Mm,
April. I can't remember now when furlough started. I'm afraid it's all blurred into
blurred into
one.
one.
But I guess for some of these people who have gone on furlough, they're on furlough knowing or expecting or anticipating that come September, October time, but that potentially they may well be being made redundant, but that
Yeah.
decision hasn't yet been made or the restructure hasn't been done or whatever. So I guess there's some similarities there. So I'm just wondering what helped you kind of stay sane and keep going and still do a brilliant job, because I know you're very well, highly respected in that field.
I think there were a number of things. I think being a coach helped.
Mm.
So being able to, having an understanding of mindset and where changing my mindset would help was obviously a real gift. It's not always easy to see that in ourselves.
Mm.
And I was lucky to be doing my master practitioner in NLP, neuro-linguistic programming at the time. So every weekend that we were there, so one weekend a month for a year, we'd be on the course, and we'd have to take current issues with us to work on with a
Oh
fellow
wow.
coach. So I had a constant stream of issues that I wanted to work on, with some really skilled and talented people, one of whom actually was a fellow NHS leader. So whenever I worked with Cherry, she understood, so she had that
Mm.
added advantage of the objective perspective of the coach, but actually at a human, personal level, knew exactly what I was describing and what it can be like to be part of such a large organisation for such a length of time.
Mm.
So that was definitely an advantage. And I around that time, I also was introduced to the work of Brené Brown, who I think is just the most wonderful writer and philosopher and teacher. And the sentence that I often hear people refer to of her work is about when we own our story, we write our own daring ending. And so there was something around the importance of owning what was happening. I may not have liked it, I may not have understood it, but within it there was an opportunity and something that at some level I'd been aspiring to for some time. So that awareness of being able to grasp something and make it mine felt really, really, really important. Here was an opportunity that I could choose to do something with. And I think for me, there's that realization that when we are able to own something and therefore generate choices around it, so we can create options around what's important to us, that's when we develop our resourcefulness and our resilience through generating choice. So for me, part of that choice was around what can I learn to get me through it? What might be useful to me in the future that I can use this time preparing to do? Who can I get to know? It was
Mm.
a wonderful time
Mm.
for networking, and for asking for help, for getting other people's perspective on the situation, for getting other people's perspective on me, because one of the things that I think is a real conundrum, or certainly was for me in this situation, and I'm loath to generalize because I know that everybody's experience will be individual, but one of the things that feels important for me in reflecting is that whenever you're going through that redundancy conversation, every meeting you go to, it's about the role is being made redundant. It's almost that sense of it's not you, it's us. And then the next morning, when it's all done and you are on your own and you wake up that next day, it's all about you. There's no more, it's all about the role, because you're the one waking up going, where do I start? With that real sense of who am I and who do I want to be? And I think those identity issues are massive. And that's something that perhaps I really hadn't recognised until the fighting was over. You know, it was, even though I didn't fight my way through it, there's still that sense of you're working through something to deliver it, to live through it in a way that is suitable for you to achieve what you want to out of a really difficult situation. But there's still that sense the next morning of, who am I now? And the one thing, and I mentioned it earlier, the one thing that still triggers me at a small, less and less as the years go on, is that sense of, I did 29 years and I never got to 30 and nobody cared. Nobody cared that I didn't get the long service award. Have I ever, in the whole of my career, cared about somebody else's long service award? Can't really say I have, if I'm honest. But there was something really odd about whenever I see somebody get a long service award, that's the one thing I think didn't achieve that. 29 years is so close. There were many things that were done inelegantly, and that I would advise anybody in that position of making somebody redundant to do differently. I think there's that sense of awkwardness and embarrassment all around the table, and that does not make it easy for you as the person whose role is being made redundant. Other people feeling awkward, whilst I think they do it for best intention, and because they almost can't help it, it really doesn't help you to feel better. And the sooner you can take control. I remember going to my final meeting, and I was actually so happy with the way that I'd conducted the whole thing. I was singing all the way in and all the way out. You won't be at all surprised to hear. But then I really surprised somebody, because in that final meeting, when I walked in, I moved the chairs around when they left the room to go and make a cup of tea. And it was just any opportunity that I could make in that, particularly in the final 6 months, to feel in control of anything, even if it was just the chairs in the room. I moved the chairs around so that I was sat in the best chair in the room for that final meeting. It was the small things that made me smile. I would walk past somebody's office who was involved heavily in this negotiation, and I would just put my head around the door and smile and say good morning, not because I wanted anything, but just because I knew it made her feel awkward. And I know that sounds terrible, but you have to take those really small wins some days, and I needed the small wins.
And it's the taking back of control, isn't it? And owning that story that you talked about from Brené Brown. Yeah,
I wasn't being mean, I wasn't being nasty. I just knew that it would make somebody sit up a little bit straighter and wonder what I wanted, and I never wanted anything. I think if one of the things that I would say, if you have the luxury of time and space to negotiate, is to know what you need out of the situation. I think that's really important, because those same people who feel awkward and human and don't really want to be doing what they have to do that's in the best interest of the organisation also want to feel better. They also want to feel better about the situation. So if there's something that you want or need that you can negotiate, and I knew what my one non-negotiable was if I could have one. And I got that through being really open and adult and saying, I'm not going to make this more difficult than it needs to be for anybody. There's no stroppiness, there's no awkwardness. I will simply do the job that I am required to do. It is in my best interest to leave here elegantly. And that's what I wanted to do. I'd had a good reputation throughout my whole career, and I did not want the ending to be different. And I had seen lots of people who are so hurt and angry that it really affects their behaviour in those last weeks or months. And therefore, that affects how you're remembered.
Yes.
And
even though it's the last few weeks or the last couple of months or whatever.
That's the memory you leave people with.
Yeah.
So for me, leaving well, leaving elegantly, was a really important part. And if anybody listening can find their way to do that, I think part of that comes about knowing what you can control and do well, knowing what you need out of the situation, and then no matter how hard or painful it is, resolving that if that's more important to you to leave well, then you do go on those terms. And you may not be able to control that the outcome in terms of your terms or your payoff or whatever it might be, but you can actually affect how you show up and make sure that you leave well, I think.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So I hadn't realised that it had been a 2 year
Yeah.
process. That sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? When you talk about it
And it
now,
was ridiculous. No, it
when
was
you hear for a
ridiculous
lot
at
of
the
people
time.
that it's, you know, for some people I'm hearing, I'm not sure this
It's
is totally
weeks.
legal what's happened to some people, but you know, it's overnight or weeks,
Yeah,
which is horrible and brings its own challenges, you know, whether it's
yeah.
2 years or 2 weeks. So after you got made redundant, what happened next? What was the next thing for you?
So I knew that coaching was going to be at the heart of whatever I
Hmm.
went on to do. I think it took a little while to work out which bit of coaching, to what the new label was that I
Hmm.
needed, and that's where I think this identity discussion lasts for some time. Really, it's really easy when you're in a career that you've kind of rolled into through whatever route,
Mm.
but we spend our whole life being judged and labelled and boxed according to what we do. And but actually, the question that you get asked isn't what you do or what you did; it's who you are.
Mm.
And that I found really hard. And conversely, you know, you go to networking events and people ask you what you do, and you answer it with who you are. We seem to get those two questions really muddled in terms of how we respond to things.
Mm.
And I found that really hard in that first 12, 18 months, because you know you want to be a coach, but what sort of coach, and who do you really want to work with? And you know, and I certainly went through that stage. I recognize in lots of coaching colleagues where you think you're here to coach the world, and it sounds wrong to niche down and have your small, you know, your small part of the world to work with. I certainly went through all of that in terms of trying to redefine who I was, and more importantly, who I wanted to be. And I'd never really had to think about that. Those structures, the layers, the tiers are really clear in big organizations. You kind of know what the next step is in your organization, or what it might be if you move somewhere else. And suddenly that blank sheet of paper is both delightful and horrifying,
Mm.
because it's really up to you to create it. And I think, and that took a lot of research. It took a lot of listening. I mentioned that I'd used the time to do lots of training, but that still didn't prepare me for those decisions, and the fact that you can actually decide anything when you're setting up your own business. You know,
Indeed.
that's quite weird.
Mm.
And on the one hand, you go, well, just decide, just choose. You no longer have to worry about anybody else. Um, but actually, you also have loads of other people to think about and take into account in terms of what people need from you, and what your business might become, and who you're here to serve. So all of
Mm.
that took, you know, real time and
Mm.
effort, and a few rights and wrongs, and a few pathways, you know, a few not ill-trodden pathways, but I don't think any of the time was wasted. But you know, I had to go in the wrong direction a few times to learn what I was best at, and most importantly, who I really enjoy working with.
And I
Because
think
it's
that's
still work.
true for anybody who decides that after redundancy they're going to set themselves up as maybe a freelance contractor or an independent consultant or a coach like you did, or you know, to set up some sort of, you know, go down that consultancy or business route, that
Mm,
probably the business idea you start off with might not be the idea you have in 3 years time, or not be doing. I know certainly that was true for me, you know,
yeah,
the how I started and what I was doing at the start is, you know, very different to what I'm doing. I mean, lots of connections and lots of similarities, but what I do in my day-to-day coaching practice now is quite different. But I think you have to go through that journey
yeah,
to get there. And I think even though, like for me, when I got made redundant, I knew I wanted to be a coach, and I knew, you know, I had all these coaching books, and but it's having that confidence as well to kind of draw this line in the sand and say, do you know what, I'm not going back into corporate, I am going to do this,
yeah.
do something different. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
and the other question is it that, or actually are there a range of things that you might now want to
yeah,
get involved in? The blank sheet of paper is as big as you want to make it. So
yes.
where else you know, where are your interests? What else do you want to get involved in? Where can you make a difference somewhere else? So all of those things are suddenly up for grabs, and there's a lot to think about in a
Yeah,
good
no,
way.
I remember relishing the fact that now that I was no longer tied to one organization for like my 9 till 5, that I could pick and choose the
Yeah,
projects that I worked on, which was great because it meant for me I ended up doing a lot of work, um, related to my breastfeeding work that
sure.
spent a lot of time doing those sorts of projects rather than my career coaching work. But yeah, it gives you that. I love that expression, isn't it? It's that white piece, that blank piece of paper that's full of promise, full of horror too at the
Yes.
same time, because you think, how am I going
Yeah,
to fill this piece of paper? Okay,
yeah.
yeah. So what helped you kind of get your business going after redundancy? What were the things that made a difference for you?
I think building my network was by far the most important thing. Getting to know people, um, working out who could help you,
Mm,
who you could align with. I think is really important if you're setting up your own business. Who else is working with your sort of client, that actually you might be able to form some allegiances with, and work together on. Um, and I think one of the other things that was really turned out to be really important for my coaching practice was actually beginning to do some associate work with another company. So who had it's been real kind of hand and glove stuff where values are completely aligned. I really enjoy working with their team, and they also, in addition to offering different projects to me, so that's very useful in itself in terms of broadening my thinking and experience. But I've also taken on an interim leadership role with them. And actually, as a leadership coach, it's really important to be walking your talk. So,
absolutely.
so that's been really great for me, having a foot in both camps, I suppose, and being able to spread my time in two directions, but still make a really positive difference, both through my own business, and in the life of and in another business that's still making a difference, particularly in the public sector, has really developed my experience and expanded my options. So, and I also have a third associate company where my values, again, really well aligned, that I occasionally do some training for. So building that portfolio became a really important part of building a sustainable business. So it's great to have my own piece, but I also really enjoy making those connections and seeing what I can offer that helps other people to build and to grow, and at the same time makes my own
Mm,
position
mm,
stronger and more stable. So for me, that portfolio has been really important. It's also important because I'm a real sorter for difference. I like doing different things and working on different projects. My whole career has been spent dealing with different things at different times and often at the same time.
mm.
So and I'd missed that a little. I didn't really realise that, I don't think, until last year. Whilst I love working with my own clients, I do actually like having that spread of interest and responsibility and being able to use my brain and my expertise in different ways. So, so for me, that's been a godsend, working with 3 organisations, including my own. But the important thing is that their values and what they're there to deliver and that they want to make a difference is completely in alignment with who I am and the work I do for my
Yeah,
own
yeah.
clients.
And I think for anybody listening who is thinking about going down the route of setting up a business or working as a contractor or going into consultancy, it's not, it's not, I think sometimes people have this thing that being an associate for somebody else is a negative thing, that it means you're not cut out for
Mm,
business, or you're not good enough, or you're not smart enough, or, you haven't got the right contacts. But I think it's actually something to be, um, to celebrate, really, because it's giving you that experience and giving you that opportunity to reach out to a broader, a variety of projects, a broader network. You're not having to do all of that marketing on your own, because I think when you first set out on your own, it can be really tough and can be disheartening, and we
yeah.
know lots of businesses don't make it beyond the first year. So I think that's a really important lesson to go for that portfolio approach.
Yeah, for me, that's where originally it was just the non-executive stuff I was
Mm,
doing, but gradually this has really worked in terms of developing my skill set and honing skills that I simply wouldn't get to use in my own business. There are so many other things you end up learning,
yeah.
as you well
Yes.
know. There are things now I can't believe that I know how to do, and actually that's been an interesting lesson coming out of COVID, is going into a leadership role somewhere else has actually taught me how much I've learned in my own business. Those 5.5 years, I have learned shed loads that other people simply didn't have that skill or awareness in terms of online working and building your online audience, your online client base. That they've always worked in real world stuff only. So needing to spread out and become more diverse and make other people aware of what they do actually became a skill that I could bring with me that I probably wouldn't have rated or valued in the same way, because it's just part of what you do when you're running your own business.
Absolutely.
So it does work both ways. I think what you're able to offer changes so much.
Absolutely.
From the skills that you develop.
Yeah. So that's so fascinating. I know I could spend hours talking to you, because I know in the past we have done. But I've promised everybody I try and keep these interviews to kind of the 30 minutes thing. So any other kind of top tips for other women who are going through redundancy, or particularly if any of them have got this drawn out redundancy process that you obviously went through, but what tips have you got to share?
So I'd say in terms of survival, create choice wherever you can, build your options, because that is what will build you resourcefulness and resilience in terms of surviving the whole experience. And more importantly, that's what will help you to create the space in your head, in your heart and in your mind to get accustomed to whatever, in this sense, the new normal is. I would say know what you need and don't be afraid to ask for it. People are only going to say no. So why would you not ask for what you need in terms of time or package? I'd say be the adult. People will feel awkward. It's not a pleasant thing to do. So recognise that it's not easy for them either. And I think being the adult in the room sometimes gets you further than what your emotional response might want to achieve. Use the time to prepare. Use every minute to think and plan and prepare for what's next. And then for me, it would be leave well. Be the professional that you have been in your career. That's what people will remember. That's how they will refer and talk about you to other people who may well have an influence in your future career. So leave well.
You never know when the person you're working with currently
pops up somewhere else.
Yeah, you just
I've
never
seen
know,
that so many times. So leave elegantly.
Leave elegantly. I love that expression, leave elegantly. Sue, thank you so much for your time today. It's been really helpful. And can't believe I didn't know previously that your redundancy process took 2 years. That seems kind of crazy, but also understandable in the sector that you worked in. Having worked in that sector for a short while myself, I can see how that happens. But that's life, isn't it?
The joys of big organisations.
Yes, indeed. But anyway, thank you so much for your time. And for everybody listening, I've put all the links to the Career Conversations in the Career Conversations group, so you can catch up on all of the other interviews as well. But thank you very much, Sue.
You're welcome.